Hey Jim, we're very excited to have you join us at LES. Thank you very much. Perhaps we could start things off by having you introduce yourself to our audience and describe to us your role, your vision, your strategy, your goals for General Mills.
Excellent, excellent. Well, my role at General Mills is the Chief Science Officer and VP for our GTECH organization, which stands for the Global Center for Technology Development. And what our role in the organization is to be able to look out a little bit longer and identify technologies that we might be able to bring back and apply to our organization. It's both a combination of connecting on the outside to bring technologies in, as well as developing technologies on the inside to support our businesses in their innovation efforts.
So there's been a lot made about the fact that we anticipate having an additional 2 billion people on this planet by 2050. What kind of problems and opportunities do you see with that?
Well, I think the biggest of the opportunities and the challenges is that we need to develop new ways of delivering macro ingredients and macronutrients to our population. Because take protein, for instance. By the year 2030, and estimates plus or minus 5 years, there will not be enough protein to feed the world.
Right.
And so if we count on the traditional agro systems that we've got today, even with all of the things that are coming out of precision farming and how we're going to increase our productivity, I really don't see that we're going to get there without some significant changes in the infrastructure that we have.
And from that infrastructure, do you see different strategies for different regions of the world?
Yes.
Because there is a lot of current thinking to just export US-based strategies to developing countries, but I'm gathering from what you're saying that that probably won't work in about 10 years' time.
Absolutely, it will not work. And I think that the solutions will be very, very different. Solutions in developed worlds may be things like fermentation and creation of macro ingredients through non-agro types of technologies. But I think what's going to happen in the developing world and actually the starving world today is that they're not going to be against GMOs.
Right.
And that revolution will be able to solve these problems. If you look at the green revolution that occurred, was it the 30s and the 40s, which again, people predicted at that point in time that by the 70s and 80s that there wasn't going to be enough food.
Right.
But we were able to cross that line by applying the technology that was being developed.
So in terms, when you think about that then, and the analogies that you draw from the past, what kind of technologies outside of, say, traditional food and nutrition do you anticipate coming and converging, or maybe what General Mills is hoping to co-opt into its Invention solution?
Yes. I think probably the true revolution is going to be around bioprocessing and around leveraging life sciences to be able to create amazing things in the future. You know, what we're learning about genomics and what we're learning about the computational ability to predict how we can get to certain attributes, understanding of the genomic sequencing of plants and microbes allows us to be able to do in a traditional way, growing in a field in even salt water, things that we could have never done before because the technology didn't exist. And we can get at this information that's embedded in the genome now and understand it and be able to collect what we need, even in a non-GMO way, and be able to apply that to commodities in a new way.
So when you think about the value chain, and you also think about our LES audience, which has, it's comprised of electronics companies, materials companies, specialty chemicals, maybe a few service companies, and maybe a few diagnostic companies, and oil and gas, let's not forget them. But in general, what other industries do you wish or could kind of share, that you'd like to share that vision of, and what do you see their role in terms of how they would work with General Mills?
That's a really interesting question, because I think today that role is changing dramatically. In the past, a lot of the relationship with chemical companies, additive companies, things like that, were really around, we buy an ingredient from you, we add it to our product, and it delivers a certain functionality.
Right.
What we see changing is that consumers are not interested in having additives in their
Right,
food.
right.
They want to know what everything is, that it's something that they can open the pantry and see. And so I think what's going to happen is the winners in the materials, additives, chemicals businesses are going to be the ones that don't necessarily follow the business model they've always followed, where I'm selling you stuff.
You're right.
It may be that I am collaborating with you to create technology that allows me, meaning General Mills, to create stuff that I put in my product in my own factories. And that's a very different business model, because the actual revenue that comes from that is not going to be based on stuff. It's going to be based on intellectual property.
Now that's interesting, because this morning you talked about advantage technologies. You talked about the difference between information and insight. And I jotted down a few things. So information, insight, and then you made a very clear distinction between an invention and an actual innovation. So almost like 4 eyes, if you will.
Yes.
Could you kind of share some of your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. The core to everything is the insight.
Yeah.
If you don't have the insight, it doesn't matter what you do on the other end. You need information to create insight, but information is not insight. The same story is true with invention. Invention is like, invention is to insight as information is to insight.
Right.
So the invention is, I've created this wonderful technology. The innovation comes when you connect all of the dots.
Right.
You connect the insight, you connect the information you've got, and you connect the invention to create something that adds value. So all of those things have to come together to make that work.
And you mentioned something also very interesting, which is connecting the problem solvers with the problem owners.
Yes, yes.
Now that might be a challenge for a lot of our clients out there, but how did you make that happen at General Mills, and how would you recommend others think about implementing that?
Well, the important thing in that is that the people who can solve the problem need to breathe the air of the people who have the problem. And in a consumer goods standpoint, that means you need to go into their homes. But if somebody was selling product to me, I would need them to live with me and understand and learn what my problems are, so that they can be in a position to provide solutions to my problems. And it's not to take the solution that I have and force fit it into my problems. In the consumer goods, we did that for many years, and it was very unsuccessful. What we really need to do is you come and say, I understand your problems, and I am going to customize using all the capabilities from a systems approach that are available to me to create a solution that works for that problem you have.
Right. But that also brings up both a challenge and opportunity. So what you're saying also, it seems to imply that demographically, there may need to be multiple types of solutions, right?
Yes.
So how does a company like General Mills that is global in scale think and deliver at that level?
That's a very good question too. There are some fundamental truths that go across the entire world. Those we know. But what happens, and I mentioned this this morning, is that there are what we call tip of the spear consumers. And they're the people who set the trends. And they start generally in developed worlds, where they are kind of assigning and creating what the future they believe is going to be. And that begins to filter through. It filters through to mainstream consumers in the developed worlds, and then that begins to filter through to even some of the developing worlds. It moves across the world in a very interesting way. Not all things that are at the tip of the sphere go through everything. And that's where the art comes in. It's to try and determine what's going to go all the way through and what is limited to a particular group. The other piece I would say is segmentation is really, really important. And I didn't get into that this morning. We talked about a specific broad population segmentation. But there are very unique subsegments, niches, that you need to go after, and they will be very different than the mainstream.
Right. But that brings up an interesting point, because with a lot of our clients, they'll say, we can see that niche. What we have trouble seeing is the relationship between that niche and our core business, and devoting enough time and attention and resources. So coming back to our keynotes this morning, including yours, what would your recommendation be for companies to be able to structure themselves for that flexibility?
I think probably the most important in how you get flexibility is by having flexible people. One of the things that we've done is we have experts that are in a position for a relatively long time, but the majority of our scientists move. They may be on the dairy business
Right.
for 2 to 3 years. And then they're on the cereal business for 3 or 4 years. And then they're on the baked good business for 2 years. Then they're in Japan for a year.
Right.
You know, they're moving around. And what we do is we create very flexible people that way.
Okay.
And so once you have flexible people, you can solve problems that require
So
flexibility.
people first, structure
Yes.
second. So in just the last few moments that we have with you and your time, excuse me, you mentioned earlier this morning having a point north. So if I were to ask you to imagine 20, 30 years out, 2050, with that 2 billion extra consumers on the face of this planet, what does the world look like from your perspective?
That's a really good question. I think the world of food,
Yeah.
now there's going to be a lot of changes in the world, but the world of food will have some changes in how food is delivered. But because of those values that I talked about, and the one being about connecting people,
Right.
that happens when you sit down together. It happens when you, like families or groups, when we meet with people, it's so much easier to open up if you're sitting around a table eating something.
Right.
So the actual act of eating, the actual act of how we get our food, I don't think is going to change that much. That core is going to stay. How that food is made, how that food is delivered, who sells the food, what portion, you talk about distribution this morning, in the how the distribution of who gets what in that value stream is going to change drastically, and probably multiple times over that period of time. And the ability for a company to morph will be absolutely critical. I talked about that this morning.
Right.
Morphing from industrialization to convenience to globalization. You have to morph. If you don't morph, you will be left behind.
Well, I think that's all the time that we have. We've been chatting with Jim Kirkwood, CSO at General Mills. Thank you.